The following IWLA webinar, Technology Operations Hot Topics, was recorded on November 21st, 2013. All information is accurate as of that date. Hot Topics are normally scheduled to run between 11 a.m. and noon Central. My name is Joe DeGuzman, and I'm the Senior Coordinator of Member Marketing for IWLA. Today is my pleasure to introduce our featured speakers, Mr. Aaron Laird and Mr. Tim Osmolsky. Aaron Laird is the president of Naves International Software. While at Naves, his responsibilities have included the identification of issues facing the 3PL industry and defining the software solutions for those issues. Tim Osmolsky, 3PL segment manager of the Raymond Corporation, will provide the operations hot issues perspective. Tim's work experience in 3PL industry includes procurement, contract management of material handling equipment, and development of 3PL logistics and distribution business. Before the webinar starts, I'd like to quickly address protocol for the webinar. During the webinar, all participants' lines will be placed in lecture mode and all participants' lines will be muted. To collapse the interface window on the right-hand side, please click the orange button with the arrow that points to the right. If you minimize your application, you will no longer see the presentation. At the end of the presentation, there will be a Q&A session. Please submit your questions in the questions box in that same user interface window. Also, if you're having any technical issues, please use that use that questions box and I can respond to you directly. This presentation will be distributed via email later today or tomorrow morning. With that, I'd like to hand over the presentation to Aaron and Tim. Guys, go ahead and take it away.
Great. Good morning. This is Aaron Laird, and Tim is online with us as well, and he will be picking up in a few moments. But I'm going to start the webinar on technology and operations hot topics. With basically the background is this is some material and comments and thoughts that came out of the recent IWLA Technology and Operations Conference in Chicago. Today, we're going to go through an agenda that looks something like this. We're going to touch on topics from a technology standpoint, from the standpoint of 3PL challenges facing 3PLs, managing technology change, contingency planning, implementing voice, future trends in WMS, and then Tim will talk on KPIs, work standards, workforce management, and Affordable Care Act and HR challenges. So I want to begin with some comments that came out of a breakout session. The breakout session was focused on challenges facing 3PLs today, as recognized or experienced by the attendees to the conference. In the breakout sessions, the attendees were allowed to present to each other in dialogue regarding the challenges that they were facing in their operations, or maybe challenges that they saw facing 3PLs in general. Interestingly enough, although there were many topics or points that were brought up, interestingly there were two that were fairly common and came up more than once. The first of these was the challenge of change management. With the almost continuous change that 3PLs are facing from both internal and external sources, there's often a forgotten element, and that is taking into account proper change management, the process of defining the change for your people, getting their feedback on the approach to the change, getting them to buy into the change, and then having various training sessions, review sessions to make sure everybody is on board as you move forward in actually implementing the change. Without that piece, a lot of the challenges that we develop projects to address do not come to a full and successful completion, again, because change management has not been properly accounted for. The second common concern or issue was the concept of process automation and streamlining, at least as it refers to primarily to technology and to application software that is used to support the attendees' business. And the comments that came up is more along the line of questions. Why is it necessary for an operator to intervene in a process when in fact the WMS or other business application has all the intelligence available to it to actually make that next step or make that next decision automatically. The other complaint was where operator involvement is reasonable and required, oftentimes there are too many keystrokes to accomplish the next step. So, rather than 2 keystrokes to initiate a task, maybe there's 10 or 15. So the group challenged those of us who were vendors of application software to go back and think about how we can address the fact that process automation and streamlining can be more an inherent process in our applications. Following the breakout session, we moved into a panel, 3 people presenting under the general title of Managing Technology Change in Operations. We just want to touch on a couple of aspects that came out of that. One was the concept of growth management, or managing what happens in your organization to deal with the growth that's facing it. Customers, people, processes, and capital are obvious impediments to growth. Usually the cash and the customers are somewhere available, but oftentimes the remaining 2 are quite substantial, and that is overcoming people and process obstacles. We often focus on hiring the right people, and then assume that the right people will somehow manage to accomplish the organization's goals and strategies. However, that's not going to happen if you do not have proper definition and implementation of the processes that are required to move the organization, in this case, deal with the growth the organization is facing. So really the difficult part of the equation is not hiring people. The difficult part of the process is once you've got them hired, how do you present them with defined processes that through implementation will actually move the organization forward to manage the growth that is facing it. Just continuing on that thought, we were challenged with the concept that process definition is the silent killer, this sort of invisible piece that gets neglected, silent killer of growth. And it was suggested that there are about 6 things that you really have to go through in defining your processes and actually using them to enable management growth. I guess the one I would like to highlight on is it's easy enough to determine the steps that have to be put into the process. What we often neglect is breaking those steps down into discrete pieces of activity or process that need to happen, writing those the standard operating procedures, linking those steps together in a cohesive form, publish them so that our staff have them available, easily available, and then if at all possible, automate as many of those steps as you possibly can. We continued in the panel with a little bit of a discussion on staffing. As much as I related that process is the silent killer of growth, it was highlighted that hiring good people is important. the suggestion was made that if you're looking to hire and build a good employee for your company, you need to consider 4 separate aspects to that. The employee must have a positive attitude, has got to have the ability to improve or follow process, it's got to have a good work ethic, and obviously has to have the skill necessary to perform whatever it is. And once you find those people, then your reviews of those people should be based on the same criteria that you use to hire them, so you make the process quantifiable through the hiring process and the review process. And then as you determine that your staff are meeting, exceeding, or failing to meet the desired goals, then you have to recognize that. If they're meeting them, then obviously you're happy with their progress. But if they're exceeding them, obviously you need to consider some sort of remuneration, pay them differently, separate them from the crowd, give them awards. These are ways to retain good people once you have hired them. So just to summarize, we'll read through this, but really focused on the using the 4 pillars, as I mentioned before, as a part of the process of hiring and reviewing. Keep a database of your responses on interviews, or your responses to reviews. Keep track of how your employees are improving, staying the same, or even failing. The next topic that was brought forward was, again, the challenges inherent in technology is the change that faces technology. The industry faces a huge and growing complex mix of customers who have many different requirements, and as the local 3PL provider, you're faced with trying to meet all these different agendas as well as your own corporate agenda, and remain efficient and profitable through as much standardization of process and leveraging of resources by training them to do similar tasks for more than one client or requirement. Many of the customers of small or mid-sized 3PLs will bring some of your most dramatic demands because they don't have the maturity or the resources to be top drawer providers of services without your help. So they really expect magic from you, and oftentimes they're not prepared to pay a great deal for providing that magic. Larger service providers may have the option of walking away from the demanding client, but many of us really have to make the best of the situation, gain and retain the client, and deal with the change attributed to meeting their requirements. Some of the sources of putting together a project to manage change, you can see these on the screen. Obviously, you want to know where the change is coming from, what it's comprised of. You really do need to go through a review process to make sure that you want to comply with the change or maybe suggest modifications to the change. But once you have agreed upon what that change is, both internally and with your clients, then develop the plan to implement it, produce a plan to test your implementation, train your staff, and then make sure that in the deployment process you have seriously considered all the possible contingencies that might arise by either failure to perform a particular task or failure to perform it correctly, or the unexpected that maybe just isn't in the plan at all. So what if, what if, what if? So technology, the technology change that faces 3PL can be actually managed by 3PLs of any size. You don't need a professional project manager, but you do need to follow accepted logical project management steps. And in the end, if you don't plan, or if you fail to plan, obviously you're planning to fail. The next topic that was very interesting was the topic of business continuity, and the concept that it's more than just disaster recovery. Business continuity is an activity that is performed by an organization to ensure that critical business functions will be available to customers, suppliers, regulators, and other entities that must have access to those. Business continuity is not something that you put in place to activate as a project at some point. Business continuity is a method of doing business that constantly reviews how things are going, and as challenges or disasters, whether they be of a natural in source, or whether they be from clients, from internal activities, when those challenges occur that challenge your business continuity, then you have the plan already in place to deal with that issue. Disaster recovery, however, is the process, policies, and procedures related to preparing for the recovery or continuation of a failure in technological infrastructure. So it really focuses on technology systems, whereas business continuity focuses on the ongoing quality of business experience, both for your clients, for your employees, for your community. We were given 10 tips for surviving disasters, business interruptions, and service failures. I won't go through all of these, but there were a couple that were quite significant, I thought. One, which I think may all be guilty of to some degree, is we just hope that we're not going to face a disaster or business interruption. That hope is not a strategy. It's important to identify what you want to protect, and things that you might want to protect is your brand, your relationship with your clients, your ability to service, your employees' quality of work and quality of work environment. All of these things, once you've identified that you want to protect them, then you need to put together a risk matrix, develop a plan, test the plan, train your people on the plan, and skipping down to towards the end, one of the very important things is to maintain a positive attitude. In other words, develop and encourage or foster the attitude within your organization that no matter what happens, we will continue, we will manage, we will come out on top in spite of temporary or even longer term setbacks. And finally, this is an issue that goes right across the supply chain, so oftentimes your business continuity plans, your disaster recovery plans require you to reach out to your clients, your external stakeholders, your vendors, and include them in the plan so that you have a response to the business continuity issue or disaster that includes not only your internal resources, but all your partners and the people you serve. There was an interesting quote. Superstorm Sandy highlighted the strengths in the nation's ability to respond and recover from disasters. However, challenges remain with the federal government's ability to meet survivor needs when surging resources into the field during disaster response. Superstorm Sandy raised a number of challenges and made them quite evident. One interesting piece of information that came out of it was the city of New York had a quite well developed disaster recovery and continuity plan. They had gone through all the steps, all the departments knew what they had to do in response to a given business continuity or disaster situation. However, when the storm hit, the office of the mayor suddenly stepped in and started directing people contra to the plan, and they did make it through, and you could even say made it through fairly well. But their response to Superstorm Sandy was complicated by the fact that when the disaster came, they didn't follow the plan exactly. They did not go down the pathway that they had developed and rehearsed. They actually went a slightly different direction, which made everybody's job that much more difficult and recovery that much more slow. The on the final day, there was a very interesting presentation by Representative Topfox talking about implementing a voice technology within the four walls. And the suggestion was that today more than ever it can be easily and inexpensively implemented. We were presented with a number of reasons for adopting voice. Highlight a couple which we'll talk a little bit more about in the following slides. Increased accuracy and reliability. The technology now combined with your WMS allows for checks and balances that are much more difficult to obtain using the current scanning and or paper methodologies for performing your work. Voice technology greatly reduces or significantly reduces picking time and actually some of the other functions that can perform. There's a rapid payback to implementing the voice technology. It can be as soon in as little as less than a year, and implementation has been greatly improved by some of the technology that is currently being available in terms of voice tools. Just touching on the advantages, hands-free, eyes-free. A lot of different things that this improves. It improves the ergonomics. Obviously, when your picker is picking, his picking tools are his two hands. If those two hands are occupied holding pieces of paper or occupied holding a scanning device, it's going to slow the process down. The employee has to go through more actions to perform a particular work instruction. Work safety is improved because with hands-free, eyes-free, the operator is more able to focus on their environment around them, to watch for equipment that's moving, to watch for things that they might bump into or otherwise hang up against. So the hands-free, eyes-free was a very big plus for using voice. Skipping down to the bottom, online and real time, the voice technology can integrate very closely, tightly with your WMS, so that the information that the operator is presented over the voice headset is real time. It's exactly what's going on, and their feedback is updated real time back to the WMS. So you have again a real time view of what's going on the floor through the voice technology. All of this collaborates to give you a higher performance in terms of completing and providing on-time deliveries to your customers. Interestingly enough, voice picking, which is really what you hear talked about most often, the voice technology is not limited to picking. Some of the things that are also possible is listed on the screen, but include receiving, put away, inventory and cycle counting, very, very important use, another place where you need high accuracy and efficiency, but you can use it also for cross-docking, loading out, but also for presenting to an operator checklists that they have to perform to, whether it be a bill of materials, assembly type of scenario, maintenance that they have to perform, possible maintenance on a piece of equipment, or a quality check process where certain questions have to be asked, certain answers have to be recorded. Voice lends itself very well to that today as well. In the area of efficiency, some interesting things. A work instruction that is communicated and responded to and performed according to voice takes on the order, a single instruction takes on the order of 3 seconds. RF scanning, interestingly, is at the high end of the scale, communication through RF, scanning the barcode, making entries on the keypad, can be on the order of 8 seconds. Using these timelines, you can skip down to the bottom of the page, and you see for 10 pickers per shift, you might realize a savings of over up to 20 hours for that shift. There were very quick coverage of some of the technology solutions on the market for voice. Just to touch briefly on these, the two main solutions involve either a speaker-dependent solution or speaker-independent solution. This is the technology involved. The speaker-dependent solution is very much dependent on voice training the device. So the operator has to spend approximately 40 minutes going through scripts with the voice headset, getting the recognition, the machine recognition down so that the voice technology works. If that operator develops a cold or has some other medical condition that changes the way their voice sounds, then you have to retrain the device before you can operate again. So it's the older technology, still workable, but inherently it includes this retraining or speaker familiarization aspect. Speaker independent solution, the newer technology, no training required. New employees can start immediately, and it is sort of human voice, in other words, yes, no's, as opposed to scripts that the older technology typically depends on. So the results you could expect, productivity increase of 20 to 22%, improved actuary safety, and as I said, the return on investment can be as little as a year. Finally, at the close of the session, there was another panel discussing present and future trends and issues facing WMSs. I won't go through the entire list, but obviously some key ones which were even included to some degree in this webinar, capture and presentation of KPIs. If you can't measure it, you can't really determine whether you're doing it efficiently, not efficiently, whether you're making money or not. So KPIs, an ever-increasing requirement for producing more and varied KPIs is something that faces WMS. Ever-increasing growth in the e-fulfillment area, pick and pack functionality on the floor, tied usually with some sort of web storefront where in-consignees can come online, purchase goods, settle for those goods through a credit card access, create an order, and the order drops automatically to WMS for fulfillment. This leads to a lot more activity in the small parcel shipping area, whether it's an interface with FedEx or UPS, or a more sophisticated interface with a shipping system like ClipperShip, which handles multiple modes of small parcel shipping. RFID support. It seems that this is rising in importance again. So we were challenged to expect that that's going to become more and more important. And smart material handling equipment solutions. In cases where you need high efficiency, high accuracy, and the application has the funds behind it. There are more and more material handling equipment solutions being implemented, whether they be carousels, pick-to-light, robotic systems where maybe you have a lights-out warehouse where the goods are put away by robots, are retrieved by robots, and the picking function is the sort of the last step, and that's still involves personnel performing the action of picking activity. So Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you for your aspect.
Great, thanks, Aaron. That was really good. So we sat through the KPI, the presentation on key performance indicators, and it was absolutely excellent. One of the main takeaways, and Aaron, you can go to the next slide on this. Thank you. You know, the key takeaway was measure what matters, and that was really emphasized in the presentation. You know, there are so many metrics being added to the operation manager plate that they absolutely can't measure everything, and this was called the boil the ocean effect. And it was really good. It really captured what you know is reality out in the operations world. You know, we're not sure who reads all these numbers, who reads all of these reports, and who actually needs them. You know, one of the points was, you know, to pick these specific measures that are relevant to the business. And an example that was given was that this organization created, you know, just a mountain of reports and data. And when they were presented to the customer they really told them that he didn't need everything. You know, they absolutely created, you know, data, and they created metrics that weren't really needed, or the customer wasn't interested in them. So, you know, to pick those specific measurements that are actually needed, you know, the organization, it was pointed out, can't measure everything, and that creates firefights. So if your people are working on these reports till midnight, you know, or they're rushing to get them completed for a customer requirement, you know, you have to step back and take a look and actually determine if what we're doing is needed. You know, what gets measured gets managed. So once you start this, you have to be really careful. You know, you know, when do you shut this off? So you start creating metrics, you create reports that do they last the length of the contract? You know, in the 3PL world, contracts usually 36 to 60 months. Some are shorter, but you know that's generally 36 to 60 months are the usual term. So once you start measuring this data and presenting it to the customer or using it internally, you know, how do you turn this off? Is it the length of the contract? Is it till the customer says, all right, I don't need it anymore? Because you just can't turn it off. You know, 3 months into a project or 3 months after you sent out reports, if your people stop doing it, it'll be noticed and, you know, it'll be managed. So you really have to determine, and this goes to the utilization of resources, you know, the activities, you know, who needs this and who's going to use it. And one of the things we talked about, one of the session, was locked away data. So the people who are creating reports, are they sharing them? Or, you know, how people change in organizations now. It's a reality of, you know, people leave in an organization, and is that data locked away, or was it shared? You know, in the old days when we had filing cabinets all over the place, you know, things got lost in filing cabinets, and that was kind of the example used, is this data locked away, or is it being shared? So Aaron, let's go to the next one. Oh, one too many. We had a sequence here. There was the one in. Okay, we'll go to the next one. There was one we talked about. There was a quote from Vince Lombardi: "If you're not keeping score, you're just practicing." So you do have to measure, and you know, there were some main stakeholders mentioned were customers, shareholders, and employees. And there we go. Thank you. And of course, the customers, you know, the customers either determine what, you know, what's needed to be measured, or they'll drive it. You know, they'll create the requirement. And of course, the shareholders on profitability, and the employees on, you know, do we have the right employees, or the employees we have the ability to create the data and manage that data that we've created. And so we talked a lot about the balanced scorecard, and of course that balanced scorecard was capturing the needed data that's needed by operations. You know, there's a lot of measurements, and we mentioned WERC created a lot of metrics. They put out a report annually on metrics created for warehouse operations. And as you all know, that report is expanding. It's like endless aisle inventory. You know, those metrics keep expanding. So the balanced scorecard kind of brings that back into reality of the balance of the things that are needed, what's being measured, who's measuring them, and is it useful information. So Aaron, we can go to the next one. Oh, you know what? Go back to. So I'm sorry about this. We're just out of sequence a little bit. I wanted to go back to the perfect order index. There we go. So one of the most important metrics in work standards is the perfect order index, and it's another work measurement. But of all the managers, customers, people involved in this, on-time shipments by far is number one as far as importance. So on-time shipments, on-time deliveries in the perfect order index is number one, in there's not a close second. But the four elements of the perfect order index: on-time shipments, percent of orders shipped complete, no back orders, orders shipped damage free. So when the customer receives that order, it's ready to go. And orders shipped with correct documentation, and this could be, you know, from shipping documents all the way to a correct invoice. And you know, a lot of people get hung up. So when you're measuring the perfect order index, in the end, you can get caught with an incorrect invoice. And we all know with Oracle and all the systems out there that, you know, good data, good data is needed to create invoicing and to create the correct documentation. So the perfect order index can be used for any industry. You know, it started in the consumer industry, started with consumer products companies shipping to stores. But the perfect order index could be used for any industry, any size business. It's a great measurement, and it's really expanding in the 3PL world. In one of these, you know, on the perfect order index, it can be used for e-commerce, it can be used for shipping to stores, it can be used for shipping from one division of the same company to another. So it's really important. It's really a great indicator of your business. In the three other points on there: lost sales, back orders, as a percent of total lines, and back orders percent of total dollars, all come back into that complete orders shipped. One of the things everyone is getting hung up on now is complete orders on time, no back orders. So the word back order is really turned into, and I don't want to say a cuss word, but it is. So back orders in percent of orders not shipped complete, not shipped on time, are really important, and it's being really measured right now in the operations world. Søren, can we go to the next one? So predictive data versus big data, and some people are calling this dynamic data. There's a lot of data being managed. One of the comments were that the people now in operations just don't have the staff to manage this blizzard of data that's coming down at them. And so what happens is they become reactive rather than proactive. So this data, and it can be from, point of sales to inventory management to, the shipping data, but we've created a lot of data, and, is it all necessary? Is it data that we can use, and is it data that we can manage? So, one of the points made during the presentation was to eliminate this non-value, the non-value data and the added efforts that are needed to manage all this data, to organize it, and to report it. And that was to take the emotion out of decision making also. A lot of process changes, so this data drives a lot of process changes. One of the examples used was the presenter put up a blank slide and said, are these your processes? So a lot of organizations, and I don't know, there wasn't a percentage used, but organizations don't have these written set procedures, processes. So, the improvement comes when you have processes and you make improvements to those processes in place. So, there was a lot of talk on, do you even have the processes in place? And I know from the world of capital equipment, it's amazing how many organizations don't have set procedures and processes in place to buy and finance major capital equipment purchases. So, we also talked about, employing the PQM as part of your process changes and continuous improvement. And of course, the profit pressures, price minus cost now equal profit. It was a great example used on the search for the low price airline tickets, and the software created for almost a minute by minute search for the lowest price airline ticket. And it was just an example of the data that's being created and collected to track prices, to track costs in the end. And we all know this, from the operations side and the people who manage distribution centers and manage distribution operations. The pressure on these people now is tremendous. The operation managers, especially now in this season of the year, the pressure on profits, and cost management is just, it's huge. And there's a lot of pressure. There's going to be a lot of pressure on all of these folks for the, till the end of the year, and of course into 2014. So can we go to the next slide there, Aaron? Great. Oh, I'm going to go one more. I'm sorry that this was. So one of the sessions in the morning was workforce management, and this was really, the presenters really did a great job on addressing the issues in workforce management, and talked a lot. All of the presenters were from the temp labor world, and they were all great. They really knew their stuff, and talked a lot about the stagnant wages. In 1999 the average wage was $9.50 to $10 an hour, and in 2013 it's $10.67 an hour for temp labor in a warehouse, mostly in a 3PL warehouse. So less than $1 an hour increase in 14 years, which is putting a lot of pressure. It's putting a lot of pressure on the temp labor world to meet the customer demands. because in reality, the customers still want $9.50 or below. They want $9 an hour if they can get it. In that world is really going away. I mean, one of the presenters thought that $10.67 by the end of this year would go to $11. But a lot of other industries, for example, Costco, I'm not sure if everyone's heard the Costco announcement a few weeks ago. Costco has gone to $13 an hour starting pay with benefits at Costco warehouse. So that puts a lot of pressure on the temp labor providers, because the pool of people who will take those jobs at $9 an hour is shrinking, and higher skills are required. You know, with RFID, with just RF units, you know, in the warehouses, with a lot of automation. The old box movers, you know, the muscle guys that could stack boxes all day, those jobs are actually going away, you know, in the warehouse world. So higher skills are required. The pay has not kept up with those higher skills that are required. So one of the presenters said that the people who have those skills are already working. They're not out searching right now for a temp labor position if they're a skilled employee. So a few years ago, 2009, 2010, there was a pretty large pool of people who would accept any job at a warehouse, distribution center. That's pretty well gone away. So there are more requirements now for warehouse workers than there are people who will fill those jobs. So it's really turned. In one of the things with warehouses in distribution centers accepting lower skilled workers is this headcount creep. I thought this was really, there was a great example used, you know. Yeah, they're hiring more people to do the same job because of lesser skills. So, you know, the job requires 5 people, so the requirement it's sent to the temp labor providers for 8 people. And hoping that those 8 people, 8 unskilled people, can do the job of 4 or 5 skilled people. The temp labor providers are seeing that more and more now, and they're trying to combat that. There's an additional burden of this MSP, managed service provider, VMS, which are the online management programs for temp labor. And what these do, these create almost a daily online auction for temp labor. And it's meant to drive costs down. It's meant to drive the cost of the temp labor, you know, the hourly wage of the temp labor worker. It's meant to drive them down to the end customer. And so the MSP, there's a lot, there's cost added through administration, but it's growing. A lot of companies have gone to the MSP systems. There's one called Beeline that's out there that you'll see that it's created this very competitive wage pressure on temp labor workers and temp labor providers. Aaron, can we go to the next slide? So there's a lot of legal issues and challenges in the temp labor industry. In one of the topics was how can I protect myself and my company. And a lot of in the temp labor providers, you know, they're there to protect the company. If you use a reputable temp labor provider to supply your needed labor, they're up to date on the legal issues. A lot of clarification is needed, especially with Obamacare. One of the presenters noted that if someone comes to you and they claim to be an expert on the Affordable Care Act, you know, get them out of your office because there are no experts. There's so much information out there. There's so many stories floating around, and people, you know, who are trying to portray themselves as consultants for the Affordable Care Act are not up to date. There's no one really up to date on this, and there's so many. There were a lot of examples of open-ended questions and a lot of chasing down of information. One of the things everyone is going to have to be aware of is the variable hourly employee rule, 1,560 hours in 12 months. 1561 creates a full-time employee. One of the shifts that the panelists saw was this 3 9s. So temp labor providers are being asked to send in workers who will work 3 9-hour shifts. So, for example, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, they'll work 9 hours, and that's it. So they'll be at 27 hours for the week, which keeps them at part-time. Now, one of the things this is going to create is, of course, they'll work three days at your warehouse and then move down the street and work 3 days or 2 days at another warehouse. So in reality, they're full-time, but they're not full-time with the same employer or the same staffing company. And that's employee sharing. And you know, there was some discussion on who's responsible for keeping track of that. So if someone works 3 days in my warehouse and then they go across the street and work 2 days, if I don't know about it, I really can't be responsible. But that's one of those situations that we'll see how the IRS measures that with the Affordable Care Act and how those people are classified, if they're classified as a full-time employee or not. So a lot of open-ended questions. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of management of these hours and of these workers for those companies who want to keep those people as part-time employees and not put them in that category of a full-time worker and take on, you know, the burden of the benefits and liability and everything else. And we talked about that of time clocks, of putting them through, you know, the temp labor workers, putting them in your time clock. So if you put them in your time clock, do they become a permanent employee at your site? A lot of discussion around it, a lot of really interesting discussions. And this is yet to be seen. You know, it's not settled by any means, and it's something that all of us are going to have to really keep track of in the future, especially at the start of this year, because we've gotten a 1-year reprieve, you know, on businesses with the Affordable Care Act. Aaron, can we go to the next slide? So there's a lot of organizations are the protecting temporary workers, and that was another major topic. The unions, of course, see this as an opening. The unions see this as, hey, you know, since wages haven't moved, you know, less than $1 an hour in 14 years, and a lot of pressure is being put on legislators to protect temporary workers. There's a lot of new EEOC guidelines, and one of the things we talked about was the background check rules. Background check rules have really changed, and one of the examples was the temp to perm hiring. So, for example, you have a worker who's worked as a temporary worker for you for many years and passed all the tests, passed, you know, whatever background checks that you put in place. All of a sudden, the company that he's at wants to hire him as a permanent worker for the, you know, for your end customer. They do a background check and they found something 7, 10, 12 years ago. Say, you know what, we can't hire him. Not only can't we hire him, but he can no longer work for you as a temporary labor. So there's that worker then can take that and make that a legal issue because, hey, for the last 10 years I was a good employee. You know, I followed all the rules. I didn't have any issues with this temp labor provider, and now all of a sudden I've lost 2 jobs. I've lost the permanent job that I applied for, and I also lost my temporary labor job. So there's some changes in these background check rules, and absolutely employers need to be compliant, need to follow the rules. The temp labor providers all said that that's what they're there for, to guide the employees through these background check rules. We also talked about, you know, drug testing, different rules and legal issues with drug testing of people, you know, in various operations. You know, a lot of states now have legalized marijuana, whether it's for medicinal purposes or recreational, but it's a reality. And the insurance companies are really watching this to see, you know, how this is going to affect background checks, drug testing. Some are looking at this as creating the same rules that are created for DUI, for example, as, you know, for a testing with marijuana. But a lot of new changes, and there's going to be a lot of legal challenges with background check rules and drug testing. You know, the OSHA, there's been some OSHA changes. This harmonized hazmat system, it's the global hazmat system, and that was in the handout. One of the big things we talked about was training, and especially training for temp labor employees. One of the issues is who funds that training? You know, is it temp agency or the temp agency's end customer who's the employee? there was a lot of talk on how much the temp labor agency can invest in a temp labor employee. So we know that there's a lot of movement between temp labor employees. They move from agency to agency, and as one of the presenters said, they move for a quarter an hour. So how much do you really want to invest in that temp labor worker when after you train them and increase their skills, they go down the street for 50 cents an hour or whatever the reason. But because of the uncertainty and the movement of those workers, there's a real debate on who invests in that training, because there's a real need for more trained workers in the temp labor field. Like we said at the start, they basically are out of trained, skilled labor for 3PL operations. So someone is going to have to train them, and someone is going to have to pay for that training. Now, how those costs are managed, employee or temp labor provider, that's yet to be determined. But that's going to be a real issue. That's a real issue right now, and it's really going to be a growing issue as training, the stability of those temp labor workers, and of course the wage pressure on both the agency and the end customer. So Aaron, can we go to the next slide? So I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with the American Logistics Aid Network. We all know Jack Menzies. Jack was a great guy. He was the driving force between, for the Aid Network. Jack I go to every trade show, and Jack and I saw each other at every trade show and had a lot of lunches and dinners together. Jack was a great guy. He will be missed, and we had a tribute to Jack at the program, and it was great. A lot of Kathy Fulton, who's now directing the Logistics Aid Network, and Kathy is doing a great job in carrying on Jack's legacy. But Jack will be missed and not forgotten, that's for sure. So, Aaron, that's my end of the presentation.
Well, I think just in summary, the speakers and the panelists reminded us all that we participate in an industry where there's a lot of variables coming from both internal and external. It is a challenge that we have to deal with. Continuing to do things the way we've always done them is actually equivalent to moving backwards.
Thank you for listening to this IWLA webinar. For more information and for more webinars, please visit IWLA.com.